my thoughts on the idea of the election being rigged. So this is something that I've really battled, or I've really kind of opposed, I guess you could say, is this idea that the election was rigged, and that more than that is that the idea that the only possible way Donald Trump could lose would be if it was rigged. And, he echoed this, and a lot of the supporters are echoing it. And I think that rhetoric is very dangerous. The rhetoric that, it's almost like, I heard someone talk about it. It was like he's lighting the house on fire and leaving out of the back door. And that's kind of what it feels like. Kind of feels like it's like, hey, look, this shit is screwed. We got screwed. We got it's rigged. It's against us. Everyone's against us. Don't take this lying down. And then he's out of there. And to me, all that creates is it like puts a stamp on that division of his most radical supporters. And it allows them to kind of leech onto. It's the same thing we saw with Hillary Clinton in 2016, where a lot of her supporters, they never really got over it. And, they cry. I mean, how long did we have to hear about Russia, and how long do we have to hear about all that stuff? And, a lot of people just never got over it. And what that created was this, like, what we saw in this election, where no one was voting for policy, or no one was voting for anything. It was just a pushback on Trump. It was just a pushback on this one singular person. And it goes both ways. And an exercise that I've been doing with people is I say, take the sentence and have the sentence say something to the tune of, I can't believe blank lost this election. I can't believe blank won the election. Blank isn't even fit to be president. The only way that blank could have lost the election to blank is if blank interfered. This was rigged. And you can make all those blanks, you can fill them in as if you were a Hillary Clinton supporter in 2016. You can say, there's no way Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's not fit to be president. The only way that Hillary Clinton could lose to Donald Trump is if the election was rigged, or if Russia interfered. Then you could switch over to this year and have the complete opposite side of the aisle say, there's no way Donald Trump could have lost to Joe Biden. Joe Biden's not fit to be president. The only way that he possibly could have lost to Joe Biden is if there was interference from China, or there was interference from a rigged election system, or mail-in ballots, or whatever. And it's one of those things where, to me, it's a lot like where people, whenever like their team loses or something in a Super Bowl or something, and you hear like, oh, well, the Super Bowl was rigged. The NFL wants the Patriots to win, or whatever. And then it's like, well, if you believe that, if you're there, if you are at the point where you believe that the NFL rigged the Super Bowl, or if that an election is rigged, then to me, you're pretty much done. You know what I mean? Like, how are you supposed to ever watch a football game again if you believe that the Super Bowl could be rigged? How are you supposed to ever believe in America again, or an election again, if you believe that it was rigged? So it's one of those things where it never ends. There is no end. Like, it's funny to me because, like I always tell y'all, politics are a circle, and the most radical are the closest together. And it could not be any more true than the last two elections. The Hillary Clinton supporters who lost in 2016, they acted exactly how the radical Trump supporters are acting now. It's the exact same thing. It is the exact same narrative. It is the exact same mindset. It is the exact same vitriol. And it's crazy because those are the people that they hate the most. And it just goes to show you that is the most volatile and that is not where you want to be. Personally, I believe the election was fair. Now, I'm okay with hearing arguments of the stuff like our system is flawed, right? Like, obviously, we have to do better of counting the ballots. I mean, I can go down to a casino a street away from my house, and they're working 24 hours a day, cashing chips, collecting tickets, doing whatever. The fact that the presidency of the United States drug on for as long as it did, and we had multiple states who just couldn't count their ballots over the course of like 4 days. We have these crazy systems of mail-in ballots, and you can register to vote on the day of. You don't have to have an ID to vote. Dead people are voting. Like, Is the system flawed? Yeah, sure. I'm sure it is flawed. Is even the Electoral College flawed? Like, is the idea of the Electoral College flawed? I'm not saying like Electoral College versus popular vote, but just those little intricacies. I can hear the conversations of that. I'm not saying that it was 100% correct. All right. I'm not saying 2016 was 100% correct, but I'm saying that as far as, hey, did someone bust into this election and rig the whole thing and we just got screwed? I tend to say no. Okay. And there's a big difference between that. There's a big difference between, I really don't think that you should be able to register the same day you vote. There's a difference in that argument, and I think Democrats hatched coronavirus in a lab and spread it over the world in order to have a reason to do mail-in votes in order to steal the election. Like, once you start to do that, it's like, okay, that's a pretty slippery slope. Just like the Super Bowl metaphor, do I think that sometimes the NFL may have a rooting interest in certain teams, or they're hoping a certain team wins, or even the referees may be thinking like, okay, well, I'm kind of biasing against this team. I could hear that. I could hear that argument. I could hear that argument way more than every single player on each team is playing a role and they are fixing the game, and the action on the field is already predetermined and everything's just set up because everyone's a state actor and everyone's perfectly doing it. That's where, to me, it gets to the point where it's like, that's the ultimate tinfoil hat. You know what I mean? I mean, I've heard so many arguments about the conspiracies. I've heard like each state is a different conspiracy basically, and all of the Republican states were the states that fought the conspiracy, and the blue states are the states that just they couldn't fight the conspiracy. And like I said, I've heard that Biden paid off Joe Jorgensen to run to take votes away from Trump. I've heard that Biden paid China to create the coronavirus. I've heard Biden and his team created the coronavirus. Like, I've heard all these things, and it's just it's unbelievable. I mean, it's really crazy, because the thing that I don't understand is, why would they rig the election but they don't rig the Senate? I mean, if they could rig the presidential election, they could also rig the Senate and have complete power. I think that's what people are kind of missing out on, is this idea that okay, Biden's the president, and we'll talk about this later on. I don't even know. I'm trying to stick to a theme, but it's getting harder. But this idea that, like, I think it's because of Trump, and people are so divided that they're rooting for their guy to win, right? And if their guy doesn't win, they think it's the worst thing of all time. But when you really look at this, and you look at, like, okay, well, what will the next 4 years look like? Let's just say it's Obama's presidency. I was telling somebody this the other day. I was saying where, we have an idea of what Biden's presidency will look like because he was the vice president for 8 years, and Obama was the president. Like let's just take that as a benchmark. If that's what it looks like for the next 4 years, but you remove things like Obamacare, which obviously Biden can't do, things like that, then what people are honestly afraid that their freedom is gone. And this is a big problem I've had with Trump, is that when you have such a dogmatic view on a candidate, and he's basically a Superman or a superhero, and your superhero loses, and I've heard this echoed a lot, is that people believe that Donald Trump is synonymous with America. He's synonymous with freedom. He's synonymous with your rights. And if he is gone, there will be no one there to protect your rights or protect your freedom. And that's the scary thing. That's the thing that I've been really fighting against his entire term, was this super dogmatic, where people were transforming him into a deity. Because that's just not the case. Joe Biden and his presidency is not going to turn America into Venezuela. Like, we're not looking at a situation where he's about to take all your guns away. He's about to ruin the economy. He's about to enslave you. And next thing you know, you're going to be living in some socialist hellhole. That's just not the case. And people, and we don't even have to talk about the Senate, where as long as the Senate is Republican, is a pretty balanced system where I don't care who's the president. They can't just march in there and start changing things and make Puerto Rico a state and socialize medicine and defund the police and like all these super left ideas that we've heard. They aren't an issue. So if you're one of the people who is terrified of a Trump or a Biden presidency, and you say, well, what? And I say, well, what are you scared of? Say, okay, well, I'm scared he's going to tank the economy. Okay, well, the economy's doing really well right now. Like the stock market responded pretty well to the election. I'm pretty sure that the days after the election was the biggest boom post-election in American history, and it's because of the Senate, because these companies believe that there's not going to be. They have no fear of tax. They have no fear of these huge sweeping regulations. So if they're not afraid, and they're dumping money into this market and giving us this huge market boom, I tend to trust the market and these businesses and these professionals and all that. I tend to trust their money way more than I trust a 55-year-old guy on Facebook who still wears his high school Letterman jacket, right? So I'm just not as fearful. And I voted for Trump. I've told y'all on this podcast a million times. I voted for Trump twice. And I don't look at it like my guy lost. I don't look at it like, some people are taking this how I took like when the Saints lost in the NFC Championship game to the Rams and with the pass interference call. People are taking this personally. They're taking it like their guy lost, their beliefs lost, their team lost, and the bad boys won. The bad team won. And that's the bad part, is that all of a sudden this is just so us versus them. It's so you versus me. If the Democrats win or if Biden wins, then that means the Republicans lost. It's like, not really. Again, with the Senate and all that stuff, there are a lot of Democrats who are not happy because the projected blue wave didn't happen and all these projected polls didn't come to fruition, and they expect a pushback in 2022 and they could lose even more power. And, so I just think this gloom and doom, Trump is out, thus America's over, is pretty crazy, pretty wild. Everything is just it's such a circle. Like time is such a circle where if you look at let's just take Obama's presidency and Trump's presidency. So Obama becomes president, right? Now think about the celebrations, think about the narrative, all that, and whatnot. 8 years later, during Trump's presidency, and however much of this is true is irrelevant, I'm just talking about the narratives. What's the narrative? That the country is in the worst racial divide in history. And it's the term after the first African-American president. It's like all the narrative switches so fast. And trust me, you're about to see a big switch in the narrative with Biden, because now the media, they don't have a choice. Like CNN and MSNBC, they have preached that Donald Trump is Satan, and Donald Trump is the reason for all the bad things that are happening. He's the reason for racial tensions. He's the reason for COVID. He's the reason for COVID deaths. He's the reason for everything. So what the hell are they going to do with Biden? What are they going to do if there's a police shooting? What are they going to do if there's riots in the streets? What are they going to do if COVID gets worse? COVID could easily get worse. It's getting worse in Europe. What's the news going to do? They have made their bed. They went all in. They went all in with the anti-Trump thing. So before I get too far down into that, let's go to the next theme. So that's my whole thing on the as far as it being rigged. I don't think it was rigged. I think the system could be better, and no doubt about it. But there's so much misinformation out there. I would highly advise that instead of focusing on the conspiracy theories and was the election stolen, was the election rigged, instead of that being the narrative every single 4 years, a la 2016 with the Democrats and now 2020 with the Republicans, instead of that, I think it's much more important to focus on the runoffs in the Senate, focus on 2022, focus on what's actually going to happen in some of the places that you may be afraid of, as far as what's going to happen in the economy, what's going to happen with COVID, what's going to happen with any of these regulations, what can Joe Biden actually do, and we'll kind of get into that as well. So I don't think it was rigged. I love conspiracy theories, but there's a big difference between listening to the conspiracy theories and having that run your life, So I think it's interesting. It's just it's such a house of cards. You know, I mean, you got people saying like the presidency was fixed, but they're not arguing that the votes for like the Senate were fixed. It's on the same ballot. So it's like, okay, the Senate, like, it's just weird how they're picking and choosing what could be rigged, what's not rigged. So again, slippery slope. Don't put too much time into it.